We're now in lecture 3, part 3. Here we're going to discuss the moral importance of the issue of surrogate motherhood, and then we're going to examine the freedom objection to it from the standpoint of the problem of absence of relevant knowledge. But then we're going to examine another freedom objection from the standpoint of lack of respect for and degradation of humanity. And finally, we're going to look at it from the standpoint of a civic virtue ethics objection. Same as with selling one's draft into the army or choosing not to join a voluntary paid army, a libertarian would argue that there is nothing wrong with consenting adults contracting a woman for pay to carry a baby out to term for the other person that pays. It would be an infringement on their liberty to forbid them to do so, and it would raise everyone's happiness if they made such payments. The libertarian and the utilitarian justifications. The same argument, as in the case of surrogate military service, can be rehashed here. We need to inquire into the circumstances in which the surrogate mothers choose their roles. Do they have alternatives, or do their economic circumstances force their choice? That is one kind of freedom objection based on the notion of coercion by necessity of circumstances. However, Sandel offers an additional element here. He offers a different kind of freedom objection. Sandel brings to our attention the argument that the surrogate mother's choice is not voluntary, but due to the absence of knowledge of what she was getting into when she signed the contract. This could be a quasi-libertarian freedom objection to surrogate motherhood. But obviously, it was explained to her what would happen, someone would say in response to that objection. Yes, but she could not know of the psychological, emotional, and so on bond that she would form with the baby during the pregnancy and directly after. Someone would want to press on behalf of the freedom objection on the basis of knowledge. The knowledge of the significance of this bond requires an experience of this bond, not an explanation of it. The experience of carrying and caring for an infant for 9 months inside one's body, sharing a body, and so on. The knowledge of the emotions of this bond requires an experience of them, not only a description. So, on the basis of the above, the surrogate mother's choice would seem to be coerced by circumstances, financial, and absence of knowledge, and not free, would be a libertarian's own objection to the surrogate motherhood. To whatever extent we can make these coercion by circumstances and absence of relevant knowledge objections stick in these arguments. But there's yet another way in which we can think of freedom of persons as not being done right by. When that freedom is not respected, when those persons are not respected. There should be a fundamental difference between the way persons are treated and things are treated. Persons here are beings with freedom, and things are beings without freedom. Things are simply put to use as property defined by ownership. Persons, on the other hand, should be treated as beings with dignity and respect, as freedoms recognized, not things used. This is another stab at the freedom of persons that is ill interpreted in terms of self-ownership by libertarians. The claim, from the standpoint of this latest discussion of freedom, is that surrogate motherhood treats persons, children, and mothers as instruments of profit or commodities, or as a money-making business. Mothers are treated as factories. These are ways of using persons rather than of respecting their freedom and dignity. Much like in the case of voluntary cannibalism, the volunteer used their personhood and freedom rather than treated it with respect. But what would it mean to treat children and mothers as free persons rather than as money-making businesses or tools? Have we not treated them as free beings due to that they, or at least the mothers, chose to be treated in this way? Never mind whether the choice reflects preferences or lack of alternatives. No, suggests Sandel. In our new mode of thinking about freedom, not every voluntary, uncoerced choice is a free choice. Some voluntary choices are free, and some are not. Voluntary choices that are free respect freedom, while voluntary choices that are not free do not respect freedom. It is, after all, possible to voluntarily choose something without making respect for freedom a fundamental aspect of purpose of that choice, as indeed the voluntary cannibal has done, and Sandel argues someone volunteering for surrogate motherhood does as well. A discussion of what is chosen, not only how it is chosen, is required in order to know whether a choice is free. Let us look at the clues that Sandel has given us to think about why surrogate motherhood is bad in this sense. Sandel contrasts treatment of children as, on the one hand, instruments of profit, to, on another hand, cherishing them as persons worthy of love and care. He also contrasts treating women as, on the one hand, factories, to, on another hand, recognizing that they naturally form bonds, emotional bonds, etc., of love with their children. Sandel proposes for our consideration that the proper and higher purpose of pregnancy is forming bonds of love, emotional bonds, and so on, with children and cherishing them as persons of love and care, and that surrogate mothers are paid precisely to not do that. In this sense, the practice of pregnancy and surrogate motherhood is treated according to a lower purpose, economic exchange, as opposed to its proper and natural purpose, bond of love. In this sense, surrogate motherhood corrupts and degrades the practice of pregnancy by treating it according to a lower purpose than is appropriate to it according to its nature. Sandel seems to be making 2 points. First, about civic virtue. He proposes for our consideration that in a great and good society, in addition to people pulling together during the time of crisis, and also perhaps in addition to that everyone serves as a duty in court and in the army, the mothers also form emotional bonds of love with the children they give birth to and cherish and love. Surrogate motherhood would thus corrupt and degrade pregnancy as a social practice and as a and all of the virtues that accompany it. Second, about personal virtue. Sandel is proposing for our consideration that a free person does not choose to repress in exchange for money the love and the bond they naturally have for and with a child that they have carried to term and have just given birth to. The underlying point here is that a free person does not simply choose anything they happen to want, but only those things that are consistent with respecting themselves as persons. A more in depth exploration of this interpretation of freedom is the topic of our next lecture and reading when we explore the philosophy of Immanuel Kant.